So a bit like with our internal controls, we have Paul and Lakesh and that will check our controls, but we still get external people to come and check their controls. So it's a checker of the checker. So it's not an everyday thing. I do not have time to be out there every day. It's just infrequent. And the same goes for the swimming pool, that when we do chemical audits at the depot of the swimming pool, it's the coordinator's job to make sure ChemAlert is up to date with our hazardous chemicals. But I still go out there once a year just to check that they're doing it correctly.
So using this outsourcing capacity will enable greater expertise and hopefully greater efficiencies by using, and I would assume, getting the best in the business to come in and assist with how we roll out this 3-year plan. That's the aim of this. The aim of this is not to make your position impossible. The aim of this is to provide greater expertise, and thereby greater effectiveness and efficiencies to that 3-year plan. That's my thinking when I look at this option too. So that's what I'm hoping to see. And if we can't get to that point, I also want to know why and what the elements of that, because then that goes down to how your role is structured, how we support that role as an audit committee, because the audit committee is there to determine, I guess, high-level efficiency and effectiveness, but also minimising risk, which includes work health safety, but we're also very much focusing on internal controls, which will now be part of the new local government reforms. It'll be a mandatory requirement. So I think getting in that expertise, so your project, my understanding and my expectation as an audit committee member of your project management is getting the best in the business and making sure they deliver what you want them to deliver. And I know Henry said strategic, but I don't really care. Whatever it doesn't, their role is to provide and make your job easier and implement that 3-year plan and deliver on it. And that's their job. And that's your job to make sure it happens. And then when you come here in 12 months' time or even 6 months' time, you can say, these people, whoever they are, Natalie probably knows them far better than what I do because she's an internal control specialist. But that's exciting because we're ahead of the curve. We're ahead of the curve on so many levels. So that to me is exciting, bringing those people in. Anyway, that's why I thought I'd make mention of that, because I think it is. We can get bogged down in tasks. We can get bogged down in thinking this is going to be overwhelming. This is going to be too difficult. But there's using that expertise. You make them work for you. You make them work for us. And that you don't settle for anything less.
Natalie, did you want to say something? Because I've got a couple of things I want to ask Nathan as well.
It was just more a discussion point, and I think what Nathan was trying to say is that you've got your different lines of defence. So your first line of defence are the people that are actually on the ground doing stuff. Your second line of defence are the people that are supervising, reviewing, doing, checking the sample. And then with this model, you can actually get that third line of defence, which is your internal audit function, external audit function, your audit committee. And as far as, we'll find this out with the risk workshop, Nathan knows this, so like if you've got, good risk management has assurance mapping sitting over that, and that has the different lines of defence. And to your point, you can really get the leverage, like so you take the supervisory role, Nathan, just traffic controller, and you can just get the web, like IT, even like wellbeing, even if you needed some help with some of the WHS stuff, then that could be part of it, be contracted out. It's just the managing, juggling it all, and be able to get the program to work complete.
Thanks, everyone. So again, just in my eyes, I know we haven't moved. So Nathan, let me get this correct. So work health and safety is what you've always been doing. You're going to continue doing that. And we know that there is the local government that come and do their work health and safety audits, and it's very thorough. They tell you where you've got gaps and whatever, and then you will act on that. So we don't need another third line of defence. I think that's already been done for the local government people. and they come in and they do their assessments and they rate you on that. I'm looking at more on this new right-hand side, which is what you're going to look after. So the 3-year audit plan, we know that's done, and that's got strategic compliance and operational audits. Okay, we've got that and that's happening. We've already got one that's coming back to us. And that's that auditing that we're saying, so you'll continue to do it. The point also is from there is once all these audits are done, you're going to see at least, I don't know, 10, 12, 14, 15 recommendations. Is it going to be your role to work with the audited area to see that they're properly implemented, or are you just going to hand it over to, if it's an asset manager, you're just going to give it to, you know, your director asset manager and say, you do it, or are you going to play a role in implementing those findings and recommendations?
I believe the intent is that I'll be assisting managers in developing those controls that will be implemented, and then also reporting back to this committee and also the executive team on the progress of those recommendations being implemented and the tracking of that. Because otherwise you'll have 4 different people, as we do more and more audits, 4 different people with their fingers in the pie, and it'll be easier for one person to,
But you're not going to, Ross, you're doing the coordination role, yes. which is okay. I'm just mindful that if you had to also be there part of the implementation, and as audit number 6 comes on and 7, there'll be about 42, 78 recommendations that still have to be completed, and I think you're just going to have mental illness issues. You'll be under complete stress. Yeah. So, and I'm mindful of that because I've seen it happen elsewhere. My last one is this risk management. Now, I know you're doing the risk stuff for work health and safety. So are you going to outsource that as well? So someone is actually going to come and do risk workshops and develop risk. That's the intention of this?
That's the intent with this option 2, is that I'll stay with the WHS and keep managing that. And then we'll get contractors in to review our risk management framework, work to review our operational risk register, look at the, and do the risk appetite, risk tolerance. We'll get contractors that have been doing this for a longer time with the expertise, which will speed up the process. Okay, so I'll still be managing them, but we're going to get that expertise that the Mayor and this committee would like to try and expertise that project along.
Okay, and how much are we anticipating? So that's the number we don't have, because we've got it for the audits and the internal auditing at 15,000 each. What are we anticipating for that risk work? Because that ain't going to be cheap. Sorry.
And it works. So that's, we'll have to do a request for quote going out, and we might be able to package the auditing and the risk management framework rollout in one package, and that's where your BDOs, your Dean Newberry's, your Bentley, I can see you're nodding, because that's what they do, because quite often risk will be identified through strategic operational risk registers, and then your auditing will be the checking, and then that will flow back into your, so it's a continuous cycle. So we could look at what proposals come back and package it together for a 1-year period, or you could try and have one contractor doing risk, one doing auditing to try and keep it separate. But then if they don't always align, it could be a bit, but that was a discussion that I was going to have with Paul Howard, Henry, and most likely yourself, Peter, and the Mayor, to see what your thoughts were. But I saw Natalie was nodding as a package, maybe.
And so to me, and look, that all makes clear sense, but one of the things I like to see again is that transfer of knowledge internally. So when you bring this risk consultant in to start looking at the framework and doing workshops, again, I don't know if that's the intention, Henry, for you and your executive team to actually have what I did in my previous organisation is we call them risk champions. Ask one person who wants to develop a capability around risk management within the organisation. They be part of those risk workshops, you learn all the expertise from the experts, and they are only maybe here for one term and then they move on. There's no need for them to keep coming back, because if I see a risk consultant coming in year in, year out, that's nothing is going back into the organisation. You're relying just on the risk consultant to do your risk work, and that's not risk management. You're just not allowing that to happen. Nobody's saying you don't bring them back at a future time, but I want to know where that transfer and that skill and that knowledge is going to be within the organisation. And you actually sell it to people within your organisation, one from each area, from engineering, from corporate services, who wants to build a capability. It's a great capability to have within your own, within your own CV. So again, that's another way that you can do it. So you can put all that money up front with a view of having these people being taught and skilled up as well. But again, we'll assess that as we go along. 6 months' time to see how it's going, in 12 months' time, how's it happening, and yeah. Yep.
Just to speed up the process, Natalie, did you think it was preferable that we did do an RFQ and try and combine, like, you've seen it, is that a better package, do you think, or a better working process to package it?
And this is just my opinion, is what I would do is put it out as a package. So a risk and internal audit program, because they do pack one. The internal audit program should come off your risk assessment as in best practice. It all flows through. Risk and internal audit package with so many internal audit reviews, you know what your budget is, and basically you just get your fixed fee and you say, okay, this is what we've got to spend over 12 months. We'll engage a firm to do it. That's it. And they just have to work out how they're going to deliver that piece of work for that amount of money. And you get people, rather than if you break it all up and have different providers, one, there's no synergy, and two, you're not getting any efficiency. While a firm they'll go, oh, we're not interested in like a 15 grand piece of work, but if it's, I don't remember what the budget was, but if like it's 80 or whatever, 60, that's more enticing for them, and because they can scale it and get more because they leverage their teams. So that's the way that I would do it. And from that risk assessment and internal audit, they can assess where the priority areas are and what they would focus on in that first year. And Nathan, you should be able to manage that. At SA Water, there's 2 of us, and we've just with EY this year, we've done 28 internal audits, and I'm currently managing. We've currently got 87 open audit action items, and I'm managing them myself. So you'll be fine.
Yeah, and I think it is important that we do get that risk work done first, because that's what will drive the plan. I know we have got that current plan, but that might even change. Things change all the time. And again, I've seen organisations where they've just brought in the internal audit, but they've had a dedicated risk person that does all this and updates the risk, then that's reported back through the audit committee on a quarterly basis, changes in risks and whatever. And what I'm saying is, if we're using it mainly to drive the plan, but also to get some risk profiling across the organisation, what I like to see again, and I'll keep saying it again, is if that skills, knowledge and transfer doesn't happen, then you're not actually having risk management at Gawler, you're having risk assessment. It's completely different. Okay, risk assessment, you can grab anyone and come and do a risk assessment. Risk management is changing the culture within the organisation over time. And like I said, it's not going to happen in 12 months. It might be 2-3 years before you might see some traction happening in the organisation. But we're starting today. It's good to know.
Just one more thing too, with the Galpin's review of internal controls. I mean, they're not starting from scratch. You can get the firm or the consultant to use that as a starting point, because that's best practice. We actually use that where I'm working, as that big internal controls model. And so they don't have to regurgitate what Galpins have done, because that's pretty tidy work with financial controls. It's just, here's all the information, digest it, and then you want to move on from there. You don't want them repeating what's already been done and the work that you've done as well.
That's right. And if you do use, again, I mean, you're obviously going to go to the market in South Australia. Most of the big 4 and the middle tier firms know that, better practice model of financial internal control. But then there's the other parts as well. There's other areas, HR and all these other, activities within council that they'll have to consider. And again, so we do have that 3-year plan. They might need to have a look at that as well. Can they deliver on that, or do they want to even change that plan? That's for them to come in and make the call. Excellent, great discussion. Thank you. So, Karen's moved the recommendation, seconded by Natalie. All in favour? Okay, thank you. Okay, 5.2 is the draft business plan budget and review of the long-term financial plan. Are we going to do the presentation for this one? Is this the one? Yep. Yep, you want to go through this first? Yep. So we're going to go through this paper, and then there's a presentation that was circulated yesterday. Did you all receive the PowerPoint slides?
Yeah, thank you. I emailed them
Yesterday afternoon.
yesterday
Came about
afternoon.
4 o'clock. It's okay. They're going to go through them.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. The purpose of the report tonight regards the 21-22 budget is obviously seeking the feedback from the committee because as we've noted in the report, Council's recently endorsed the draft budget for the purposes of consultation. That finishes end of this week. So as part of that consultation process, we're seeking feedback from the Audit Committee relative to the budget that was endorsed for consultation. So in that regard, Chair, the attachment 1 that we've provided the budget document is the version that was endorsed by Council for consultation. I just want to be consistent with that approach so that the feedback that we're seeking from the committee is relative to the version that was endorsed by Council. However, what we've noted in the report, members, is that since the budget was endorsed for consultation, there has been some material changes we wish to bring to the attention of the committee, and that's really relative to grant funding either via the federal or state budgets, and also taking into consideration the projects of a CapEx nature that were deferred from the current 2021 budget as part of the third quarter budget review recently adopted by Council. So I just thought it was appropriate to flag with the committee in terms of attachment 3, which is just a set of the statutory financial statements as they would look with the changes, the proposed changes to the budget that we've referenced in the report. And I thought it was appropriate to do that from the point of view of the proposed dollar changes are material. So for example, with the federal government stimulus funding, it's been recently announced we've been confirmed to receive $811,000 over 2 years. So we're flagging for 21-22 budget grant funding of $405,000 in that regard, which Council will then have to allocate to a specific project yet to be determined. So we've outlined in the report what we see as those key changes that would result from what we've referenced in the report. And I note in that regard, members, that with attachment 3, that where we've got the separate set of financial statements, that I guess the key point we've referenced in the report is that because of how the grant funding from the federal or state is treated, it does actually significantly improve our operating result, bearing in mind that that grant funding will predominantly be used for capital projects, but because it's actually in most cases untied funding, we do actually have to treat it as operating revenue. So I just want to be clear on that. But and then outside of the operating result on page 171 of 348 in the attachments with the financial indicators, I thought it was also prudent to point out what the indicative impact would be on the net financial liabilities ratio, and that is earmarked to reduce based on twofold factors, one being the improved operating result for 2021, which was endorsed as part of the third quarter budget review. So there was, I think we've referenced in the report, operationally from a cash flow perspective, about an $800,000 improvement, and also relative to the additional grant funding that we're getting in. Bearing in mind, part of the grant funding we've referenced in the report is the federal government has announced supplementary local roads funding for South Australia in the order of $20 million a year for 2 years. And based on the funding we previously received in this regard about 3 or 4 years ago, the indicative funding we would get would be 160,000 a year for 2 years, and we don't actually have to allocate that to any projects. That's just part of our sort of supplementary local roads funding, so that essentially is a financial gain for us that we don't have to tie to any projects. So that, members, was just a brief summary in terms of the updated position, but nonetheless seeking your feedback on the budget that has been endorsed. And Lakesh had just wanted to present the PowerPoint presentation, just to, I guess, give more of a bit of a 5-year snapshot. So Lakesh, if you want to bring that up on the screen, and you can talk to that presentation. Oh, sorry.
No, that's right. No, it's, I hear the crack. It's okay. Tap water's the best, isn't it, Natalie? I remember when I was working with SA Water, John Ringen, the previous CEO, you know, there's a cafe, the Fun Cafe, and a lady in front of him, and I was behind him. She's bought one of these, you know, fancy ones, Perry or something, for $5.50, and he's turned tap on. He said, "Do you realise you can get that a lot cheaper if you just turn your tap on, and it's much better." So funny, and it's so true. It's just. Here we go. Thanks. Do you want me to? Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for giving opportunity for the presentation and all the members. So I just prepared this presentation just with the 2021-22 budget. And this includes the adjustments that Paul was discussing before. And it starts with what is the fundamentals of budget, what is the budget overview, income and expense 2021-22, what is the projected income, and then basically follows with the 5-year snapshot of how income and expense has trended, how the balance sheet has trended for Town of Gawler, and then at the end there is some questions that if anyone has, I'm happy to answer them. So with fundamentals of budgets, that comes straight from the Act. We need to include budgeted financial statement. We don't need to have notes in it. Projected operating funding is sufficient to meet the projected operating expense. In other words, like we can't budget too much for deficit, and then the budget must be adopted by 31st of August. So that's just a snapshot, just a reminder for everyone where the budget fundamentals are coming from. That's our budget overview in a snapshot. Projected income of 33.7 million. Projected expenses of about 33.3 million, and there is operating surplus of 426K and a capital expenses of 13 million, which also includes the carried forward from last year. So that's there. That's a bit of comparison from where we are tracking actual at the moment. So the first column is the category. The second column is year-to-date actuals. So in income, we have to date spent 29.9 million. Initially, we budgeted 30.5. When we amended it in December, it was 31 million. 31.4 in March budget, and 2021-22 is 33.7 million. And that's driven by some of the prepayments of grants that we have received in advance. And if you see, like, you know, out of 100%, the major revenue is coming from the from the rates, and the second one is grants, right? With expenditure, same exercise, like, you know, year to date, we have spent 25.3 million. 32.2 was budgeted in initial budget. In December, it was 32.4. Then we cut it back to 32.3. And now we are saying, like, in 21-22, we would be spending about 33.2 million, which is consistent with, not really consistent with where we are at the moment, but hopefully with carried forwards and all, it might match. And in regards to expenses, majorly 40% is material contracts and others, and employee cost is 37.2 million. That's not end of May, that's like till last week when I prepared this. So 25th of May.
So, just looking at the expenditure, we're saying that in March we said we're going to spend 32 million and we only spent 25. So we're going to spend 7 million in the next month.
Yep. So the March draft budget is basically like, you know, the end of year. So that's 32.3 million needs to be spent by the end of year, 30th of June. And we have at the till date, we have spent 25.3 million. So that's like, yeah, 8 million gap there. Yeah, which is being highlighted to the managers, and they're looking at. Yeah.
You just bear in mind, members, that the included in that expenditure is depreciation, which we generate on a quarterly basis. And if my maths serves me correctly, yeah, we're looking at 4.7 year to date compared to 6.3. So that will be generated at the end of the financial year once we've capitalised all the capex, and so that's obviously not a cash expense, but that's a sizable component of that difference between year to date and the forecast.
The other big one is obviously materials, another 4 million, and again, just not mindful of the top stuff which applied to run councils, you know, whether there's enough, you know, whether you will actually get on the expenditure between now and the end of June. 4 weeks to go. So.
Chair, if I can also point out with employee costs, there is considerable year-end adjustments that are done relative to accrued leave and the movements with leave entitlements, and that's only your end-of-year calculation. Again, not a cash expense, but we have to account for increasing leave liability, whether it be long service leave or annual leave. So in terms of the unspent or unaccounted for expenditure between year to date and the forecast, that in itself is a significant component relative to the employee costs.
Sorry,
And the next slide is mostly just showing like the pie chart representation of our income and expense. So majorly income driven by rates, which is 76.5%, and 15.26 is grants and subsidies. Other than that, we have got user charges, statutory charges, and then smaller bits coming from income investment, reimbursement, and other revenue. And if you look at projected expenditure, 37.2% is employee cost, and material and expense is 40.8, and then the depreciation of 19.86 million. So that's how the expenditure and income looks in regards to where we are spending most of our money. So then the next is operating expenditure by division. So that's basically shows you that they are the various divisions within the council, how the money is being spent. So the graphs is telling like, the infrastructure and engineering services get the maximum or spend maximum amount of council's expense. So that's about 36.84%. Then the development and environment regulatory services, about 20.46. So that's how, like the money is spent within the departments in council. So yeah, the next is the capital expenditure breakdown. So how the capital money is being spent. So the blue lines are the new and upgraded, and the red ones are replacement and renewals. And the categories is like stormwater drainage, curb and gutters, roads, buildings, project management, footpaths, fleet, and others. And mostly like, the categories for other includes playground, IT projects, street asset, bridges, and open spaces. And what it exactly tell us is that we have been like, we have we are being spending money on the capital on a consistent basis and on consistent categories. About 13 million is going to be spent next year, including the carried forward. So that's where we are spending our money, on what categories. Then this is just a 5-year income and expense trend. So the blue one is income. So the income has been consistently increasing. In year 2017-18, if you see the uh, lines, basically the income is higher than expense, and therefore there was a surplus. It got a bit less in the 2018-19. In 2019-20, there was a loss of 255K. In 2021, we are projecting a loss of 873K. But if you see 2021-22, there is a projected surplus of 426K. So our income is 33.7 million for next year and projected, and 33.27 is our expenses. So that tells us, like from the negative, we are again, the budget is again looking to go in the positive. Whereas if you see, like the long-term financial plan that's in the copy that has been given for public consultation, 21-22, the projected deficit was 395,000 in that document. So from 395 to 426, it's a bit of improvement. And yeah, and that's how it's looking in income and expense trend. And the next one is 5-year balance sheet trend. So that tells us like how our assets, liabilities, and equity is traveling. So if you see like the blue lines are assets, the middle orange one is liability, council's equity is like what's the council's worth at the moment. So basically with our assets have been increasing consistently, so do our liabilities, and therefore the council's equity has been increasing as well. So year by year, council's worth has been increasing, but the fact is like the council's borrowing is also increasing. Since 2016-17, we were at 11.2 million, and in 2021-22, it's projected to be 24.2 million. So therefore, like the trend shows that the council's worth is increasing in market, and so do the borrowings. So the message from here, underlying message is like, if there is any additional funds that council is getting, or if there is any saving somewhere, rather than, like putting it on some bigger investments, it would be better like if we get our borrowings down somehow. And that's like council's direction and management direction. So that's where the diagram is heading. And ideally, like, council's equity increases, but then the reserve should increase rather than the borrowing should increase. So that's the message there. So, and the last one is like, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Lakesh. Just on your previous slide, can you put that previous slide back up? So what's the management response to reducing borrowings? Because we're increasing borrowings, I think, by a couple of million this next financial draft budget. And there is a desire to reduce borrowings. So what's the plan to make that happen?
Yes, through the chair. My initial comment, Mayor, relative to this screen would be, yes, this is showing with the line graph, the borrowings the last 5 years, bearing in mind the 5 years prior to that, there had been the conscious effort, as you'd be aware, Chair, through the help of the Audit Committee about 10 years ago, where for the 5 years prior to 16-17, that graph was actually trending the other way and that was a deliberate approach to get the financial capacity to invest in the building we're sitting in. So, and yes, Mayor, you rightly touch on the fact that for 21-22, there is a projected net increase in debt, I think between year 1 to 2 mil. And certainly that is acknowledged. I know one key element impacting that, I believe, is there's a raft of projects, but one key one is the council's prudent decision to invest the 1.3 in the LED street lighting. And that's been a conscious approach based on the fact that we'll be realising savings on an annual basis of about $200,000, the improved quality of the lighting, and also reduced carbon use. So what I'm saying in that regard, members, is if you exclude that specific project that was brought to the table for those, I guess, 3 key win-win scenarios, if that project's excluded, we're essentially really looking at the debt remaining unchanged. But in answer to your question, Mayor, in terms of reducing it, the easy answer there is essentially to scale back on capital works. Now, the message, Chair, that the administration's consistently demonstrated to council is not to compromise in doing that, not to compromise on our replacement renewal, and thereby to the detriment of our asset renewal funding ratio. It really comes back to reducing the investment in new and upgraded assets, and also being cognizant of the fact that the new and upgraded assets, depending on the level that's considered in the budget, yes, will potentially increase debt, but just as importantly, those new and upgraded assets will have financial consequences in ongoing maintenance and new depreciation. So if council's appetite financially is to reduce debt, it's the quick, easy solution, as has been demonstrated in the past 10 years, is to curb our investment in capital for a number of years to get debt down. And the members might recall that was our plan. We're geared up to do that immediately before COVID hit, where we had that, I think, what was then option 3 of reducing CapEx by $2 million a year for 2 years. But then COVID hit, council's priorities then changed, and so that has certainly been the intent, I believe, Chair, to get debt down, and recognising that our liabilities ratio is certainly getting up there. It's within the policy position, but getting close to that 100% threshold.
Through, Karen, if I can just read the long-term financial plan, it's saying that it's going to get down to 15.9 in 26-27, but then it builds it up again to about 24, 3 years after that. So I think that's just the nature of your business and your decisions that you're going to be doing for your new and upgraded assets. Okay. Any other questions from that? And thank you. Oh, can I just ask a question? Okay, so if you go back to the one before that, not the balance sheet, the one before that, which I think was the one before that, yeah, that one there. Can we maybe have, the next time when you do this presentation, that last one, the other, can we get a second slide that actually shows us what that breakdown is? Because I'd like to know, again, another area that I know that organisations tend to just run away with a lot of the upgraded capital is the IT area, because, you know, they want all the bells and whistles and all the latest stuff. Maybe around cyber security, I'd say yes, go for it. But as for the other stuff, maybe, you know, so it'd just be good to have that, you know, that visibility of that number there. But yeah, but thank you for these slides. Good. Peter, anything from you?
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yep, good. Yes, only comment. I think it all looks pretty good, actually. It's good to have the surplus. It's driven by one-off factors, of course, and that'll wash through over the next couple of years. But the plan and the long-term plan look pretty good. The debt is obviously something to keep an eye on and work where we can to bring that under control. But generally speaking, my thoughts are this is looking at a pretty good plan now.
Okay, thanks. Madeline?
Through the chair, I really like the presentation. That's good to see a lot more graphics, and as Peter said, that once you start drawing things out, you'll see like the buckets that need to be separated as well. So keep drilling down, and then you can see where it's apportioned, and we can work out, okay, yeah, the depreciation comes through quarterly, that makes sense, and all that kind of thing. So well done.
Yeah, through the chair, look, I certainly appreciate the feedback from members. What we've provided in terms of the draft recommendations for your consideration, I'll just draw your attention particularly to recommendation 4, in whether the committee wishes to give sort of specific feedback to the council relative to some of the comments that have been made tonight.
Well, I'm happy to start. I think for me is again, as what the mayor's really pointed out to, is about borrowings. I mean, it can start going, but I can see through the long-term financial plan the trend of bringing that under control. So maybe, you know, and again, I know you give us our annual treasury review that happens in December, so it'll just be good to see how we're tracking, at least for the next 2 to 3 years, where we're seeing that going up, but then that downward trend, and again, maybe some strategies that you've got in place to try and bring that down.
Rather than saying bring borrowings under control, they are under control. I don't think we should say they're not under control. I think we need to continue to monitor our borrowings so that they align with our long-term financial plan, because that has a plan, and to monitor our borrowings to ensure that our Paul, you can maybe help me with some wordsmithings to ensure that our financial indicators align with the long-term financial plan projections, and specifically as it relates to borrowings. I think that's a key point. But we sort of put that. We don't. I guess we could take it out. But Paul, I'll seek your advice on the wording.
Through the chair, yes, I think in terms of monitoring borrowings, yes, to ensure that the financial indicators, which is essentially in this regard, Chair, the net financial liabilities ratio, which is heavily informed by debt, yes, that it remains aligned with the long-term financial plan. Bearing in mind, members, that with the long-term financial plan, as you've alluded to, Chair, the LTFP models that ratio coming down, but that comes down purely from the basis that the plan forecasts scaling back CapEx in future years to build that borrowing capacity, such that I think in year 27, 28, 28, 29, we'd be able to have capacity to do our next iconic project. Now, that's the plan as it stands at the moment. However, I guess council may wish to turn its mind to, well, is that still the still its preferred end game, or is it a case of stage by stage basis? Because we're doing, for example, stage 1 of Carbeathan this year. Now, who's to say in future years there may be additional grant funding that we can seek for future stages, but as it stands at the moment, the long-term plan is essentially modelled, predicated on repeating what's happened in the last 10 years, in that reducing debt by scaling back capital expenditure and scaling back the investment in new and upgraded assets for a number of years to reduce debt to free up that future borrowing capacity. And that's what the plan has been modelled on.
I think an extra point, making mention of our financial liabilities ratio and keeping that within accepted targets. Is that the right terminology? So it's within, not going over 100%, for example. We're up to 97%. Now, I know Playford went up to 150 at one point, but I wouldn't think that would be appropriate for us. So financial liabilities ratio stays within accepted targets. Is that the appropriate terminology?
Yeah, within your policy guidance.
I just think it's good to actually make that really explicit, so that people we're looking at our indicators rather than drilling down on particular projects or operational matters, but keep it high level, so that can be done in a variety of ways.
Through the chair, with point B there, the financial liability ratio stays within accepted targets. I would suggest you most probably just need to refine that to saying within existing policy targets, because what someone believes is an accepted target is very subjective. And our policy target at the moment, which is a broadly accepted sector position, is anywhere from 0 to 100%. And I would advocate that council still maintain that policy position.
And Paul, further to your comment too, I think it's so important. I mean, again, I'm looking at this long-term financial plan where you said it's predicated on the new and upgraded, but I note that period when it's coming down will be a new council, and we know what will happen there. So you might get some, we don't know what it's going to look like, and who's, they could come around and turn and say, no, we want new and upgraded. So it'll be important. What I'm saying is from administration to emphasise that point when the new council comes on board. I know it's still a way away, but this is the type of key financial information that needs to be, really spelled out right at the front.
Through the chair, I think it's also important to point out with the long-term financial plan where we're saying reducing the investment in new and upgraded assets. Just to be clear, we're not suggesting like that's being removed in total. Just to be clear, what we're proposing is that having an indexed provision in the order, it's indexed from about $3 million over the 10 years. So there is a provision for new and upgraded assets. The important thing is we just have to scale that back. And I guess at the end of the day, sort of curb the want in the chamber for those new and upgraded assets, which I know can be a challenge. And as members know, being a growth council and a major growth council, invariably every year there's always challenges, opportunities with investment in new and upgraded assets to meet those growth challenges. So I'm not sitting here saying it's going to be an easy exercise, but there will have to be that financial discipline in that approach if council wants to get that debt down.
So I think like Paul has read my mind, and that's what I was going to say. But I was also going to add in regards to, like with capital, new or upgraded capital, I mean, there is always going to be opportunities from grant funding as well, where we need to match funding from our side. So it would be viable if we are doing any new investment, we use those opportunities rather than, like borrowings for new assets, if that's possible. And say like, if continue to monitor borrowings to ensure financial indicators, financial liabilities ratio stay within existing policy targets, that all is basically hindering around capital, new, providing for new assets. So I think like if C point can be somewhere, like giving a direction from audit committee, coming through audit committee saying that a less investment in newer assets or where match funding, that would be good in that sense, even for the new council if next year there is election. That's.
You put the words, Paul, because you have to manage them.
Yes, look, I can't quite, have to obviously turn mine to the words to put in there, but I think further to what Lakesh was saying, that Mayor and Chair, you would appreciate this. I think a key relevant point of difference between where we sit now to where we sat 10 years ago, when we also had high debt. What we had 10 years ago was a high operating deficit, whereas now we're essentially looking at small deficits or small surpluses. And that's a critical point of difference, because when you have essentially a break-even operating budget, you essentially can fund your replacement renewal from recurrent revenue. And whereas 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. We had $3 million deficits, had a high debt, and yeah, so where we are now, yes, recognising that our debt has crept back up there, but that has been planned increases in debt. And important, I think that's an important point of separation from 10 years ago, that yes, the debt is high, but we've got the long-term plan proposes that would still stay in a relatively break-even operating position, such that our investment in replacement and renewal shouldn't be compromised, because we'll always have the recurrent revenue to fund that. It's just to the extent of the financial capacity we'll have to do new and upgraded works. And yeah, that's why we're proposing to scale it back.
Do we want to make the C around the operating ratio then, that it's within existing policy targets of that?
Well, yes, and that's certainly a relevant point, because the two key ratios, well the three key ratios, but the two primary ones from my perspective is certainly the operating result, and I think that's a relevant point, Chair, because to achieve a break-even, continue to achieve a break-even operating result, council will have to be mindful of its investment in new and upgraded assets. Because if council in a certain year decided, no, Mr. Horde, we don't want to do $3 million of new and upgrade, we might want to do $5 million, just for example, well, the council would then have to be mindful of the impact that extra $2 million is going to have on future operating results by increased maintenance and increased depreciation. So the two do, each of the ratios do sort of interrelated to a degree. So I would, yes, suggest that having reference by way of feedback to each of those three ratios is most probably appropriate, and just reinforcing the message that yeah, we've been communicating to council previously.
So it's just the operating ratio, not liabilities ratio, just the operating ratio. That's it. Excellent. So we're happy with that? Do you need anything else?
Through the chair, I'd suggest the only other point members may wish to turn their mind to is maintaining the asset renewal funding ratio, because we've been consistent as an administration chair to not compromise our investment in renewal replacement. And so the committee may wish to suggest maintaining the asset renewal funding ratio similarly within existing policy targets.
Okay. Any further questions on this item? Sorry, Madam.
Just a comment. You know, I agree with the points made, and I think, you know, I suppose you've had like global financial crises and COVID. I think especially we thought it was going to be a year, the last 18 months has shown that whenever, you know, with the budgeting and the long-term financial plan, you just can't do what you did 10 years ago. You've got to, within the ratios, but you've got to keep it agile. You know, you never would have forecasted that interest rates would be so low, that the cost of, you know, building would be so high, and who knows what's going to happen once this all unwinds itself. And I think it's really important that the council remains agile and sort of always thinks outside the box, if you get what I mean, keeping within the ratios, but being prepared to do things a little bit differently if required.
Would you like that captured within that?
Up to you. Might be a bit hard, but just, yeah.
Well, I think, I think we've got the mayor, we've got another councillor, we've got the CEO and the finance. I think they'll continue to feed that and just emphasise that. So, but thanks for that, Natalie. Any last comments from you, Peter?
Only comment really is that the only issue in relation to the net financial liabilities is it's at the very top end of our target range. So it means that if you know, something happens, some crisis or whatever happens, there's not much room to move within that target. So that's the only concern if we want to really keep to the ratios that we've got. But then there may be situations when you need to move out of it for some reason or other. But if we want to keep inside the policy setting, then there's not much room to move. Therefore, it would be good to get it down a little bit for that factor, but also because of the risk of rising interest rates and borrowing costs on a large amount of debt.
You want to capture that? Just maybe under that, where we got under the B one, the financial liabilities stays within existing but with an emphasis to bringing it, you know, to the lower, you know, maybe closer to the, rather than leaving it at the higher end. So there's not, as Peter said. Yeah. Okay. Did you hear that, Peter?
Beg pardon?
The long-term financial plan is showing that that ratio is coming down.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-part recommendation. I'm sure you're happy with the information that we've added in there, Paul, for your deliberations. So have a look at it, and if not, any last minute changes? If not, someone to move and second. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Paul. Seconded. Karen, thank you. All in favour? Okay, carried. Thank you, Paul and Lakesh, for that. Okay. 5.3, the internal control review. So this is the review that we normally would have had right to us. So this is pulse track. So anything particular you want to raise, Paul, with this report?
Through the chair, just very briefly, obviously this is the annual process we go through. The table 1 on page 21 of 33, that just provides a snapshot that we've provided each year relative to how the final score correlates to previous years. So there's been a sort of consistent high overall result, which has continued. I think it's also just, I guess, a point of reflection through the process this year and certainly with other years is that when you do have changing staff from year to year, an individual assessments, particularly and review, can be subjective. And I know one aspect I was particularly pleased with for 2021 compared to 1920 was the improvement in external services, which predominantly relates to procurement activities. And that is really a reflection of the good work that Tara Shillabeer had been orchestrating through our increased focus on procurement. So I think that's certainly a very good, has been a good outcome in that regard, but also it's pleasing to see the consistent trend of an overall very high score, but more than happy to answer any questions, either myself or Lakesh.
Okay, open it up for questions. Yep.
Just make a comment with the, just looking at, so this is the financial controls assessment with the green lights. Is that right? The assessment of 4 or 5 or 3, so I'm talking to the right thing. With the reviewer reason, I think this is just a note for next year, no need to change anything this year, is just to make sure that that's consistent between and it's reviewers. Sometimes it's a statement, sometimes it's, this could be enhanced, but it's already a 5. Like, you know, if it's a 4, are you happy that it's a 4? If it's a 4, you want to get to a 5, you know, what's the gap? I know the treatments automatically come out if it's less than a 3. Is that a 3 or less? But I think in the 4 and the 5, this is just for bonus points, whether, you know, if it's a 4 and you're happy that it's a 4, that, you know, you're satisfied at current level, kind of, you know, no further work required, or what you can do from a 4 to a 5, or just to make it a bit of value add. As I said, some of them are statements, some of them are additional controls, just, yeah, consistency.
Thanks, Natalie. Peter, anything from you?
So it looks good to me.
Maybe just from me, Lakesh, given that you're sort of like a fresh set of eyes over all these controls, and I know you're down as the reviewer for a lot of them, what's your initial feel? Is it as good as it's saying that it is?
So thank you through the chair. Now that's a very good question that you have asked me. So half of the reviews were already done when I ended up here, and I have just assessed only half. Now, Gelpins have also done some sort of internal control review where we got 93 out of 100 controls right. Here, like, to be honest, like, this is very subjective. So every person can see a review differently and working differently as well. And the scoring is based on each person's assessment. So where I have, like, if you see, there are some drops in somewhere where I have reviewed things a bit differently. But I think, like, overall, with internal controls of this, next year I would be in a better position to review them more closely and give better reflection. But as far as we see from independent auditors' point of view, if they are saying like 93 controls are working, like I would say this is a sub part of that. So, and we can also like for next year review what we are actually putting in controls. And there is tasks that also come through when we do assessment. So those are also listed here about, I think there are about 8, 9, there are a number of tasks that every assessor, if they have assessed something under 3 or below, that needs to be carried and make sure like when next time we do this review, we have done something in regards to it. So yeah, I think the system is good. It's just getting more into it and going through it. Thank you
for that. And look, and it's good to hear that you haven't just blindly just used the same score, that you actually went your own, gave it your own assessment, even if some were a bit low, which I think is good. That's what I like to know, with the view of saying, okay, we want to get up to that level again. So what do we need to do? So that's again a good, good, strong financial controls culture to have in the organisation. So no, well done again to the whole council for that result, both verified internally in a self-assessment and through the external auditors. So no further questions on that? Oh, sorry, Natalie. Someone's got.
I think when you get the chance, like we've talked about before, take the Galpin's information, your information, you can work out where those control weaknesses really are. And then, like we talked about previous meetings, is the root cause analysis. And if there's a continuous problem that you can't work out why it keeps happening, that's what you get internal audit to have a look at. But I think you can really help Nathan out from the finance side of things to make sure that if there's any internal audits that are done over the financial controls, that you're getting value for money. They're not coming in and doing something that
It's already been done.
It's already been done, and you want to get value for money. You want them to look at the oranges and the reds, not anything that's green. And I think that's where you can get value for that, because they will tend to do something easier to start with, and you just got to put them on to other stuff.
Totally concur with that, Natalie, because that's, again, so I think it's about, it's like when the external auditors come, they give you a list of all the stuff that they want so they can do their audit. In the other side of the intel, if you don't give it to them, they will quite lovely to go away and do it all again. They've seen it and they'll just put it in under their logos, and it's money for jam for them. They'll just charge you for it. So again, I think what Natalie's saying is get all this information together, give it to them, and then say, yeah, now you come back and tell us where we can improve, because really, as I keep saying, internal audits is about improvement. It's not about catching people out and finding where you're doing things wrong. It's about how can we get better, which was, I think your earlier comments, Karen, was that you want to see that improvement for the money we're investing. So thank you for that. Okay, so for this recommendation, that we note the internal controls review report. So thanks, Karen. Seconded, Natalie. All in favour? Carried. Okay, performance measurement update. Thank you.
I've enjoyed these reports when they've come through. I think it is appropriate to get out of it. I think the times they are changing, and with the new local government reforms, there'll be other requirements that we have to meet. So, but having said that, I think these reports have been really, really useful. I think it gives just a different snapshot of where we sit, and where we sit with other councils, not just in South Australia. And I know there's only about 5 in South Australia, which, again, it's the nature of the transition across to the new local government reforms. But it's really interesting to see some of the case studies from interstate. It's also really interesting to see just how other councils, where they sit under various matters. Questions like, our staff turnover, questioned the CEO about that today, gave me a really good answer, as usual. However, it is important to look at these reports and understand your organisation and how they're performing, and you can get a sense of how they're performing. So I've enjoyed these reports, but it is time to move on.
Thanks, Karen. Any other comments on this report? Can I say, I found it interesting in that's that PwC one about the two areas, which is that cyber security where, you know, I mean, it's good that we're seeing people or council, but to say that 50% of SA councils, you know, don't even have, they haven't got anything. So, but you know what, they'd be the real small regional councils, and I can understand that because they wouldn't have that. But again, from the LGA perspective, I think they should just be going there and finding them resources and getting some sort of a, you know, a procurement so they can go around and help them. The other one is the one around IT priorities, and I like the fact that, you know, they're saying that some SA councils are looking at analytics and business intelligence in their top 3, you know, so, you know, actually using artificial intelligence, all that stuff I spoke about before. Again, what is the vision for a council in 10 years' time? I know we've got a long-term financial plan, but that's business as usual. There's nothing there telling me how different council is going to look in 10 years' time, and it will. There's no doubt, because Paul, I mean, from 10 years ago when I walked in here to this council, it's completely different the way things are done. So, and again, it's having that time out, and I'm sure Henry, as the leader of this organisation, you know, the time out with the executive team to think about and see what is going on and finding out what, you know, can change. So,
through the chair, we have our community plan, and more recently I've been having conversations with the executive and some other key staff about what's the critical path in achieving the community plan. So we're working on that relative to, in 10 years' time, 2030, and we're looking back, what do we want to make sure that we're achieving and we can be proud of? So that's just a sort of response relative to, we are looking at that strategic level, and plotting how we can achieve the outcomes that we've been documenting. And I'll take your point relative to, amongst other things, you know, cybersecurity, and, you know, there's a whole raft of issues that we're working through, but I look forward to reporting on that back to council and through this committee in the next, you know, hopefully, well, between now and Christmas anyway.
I mean, one of the other big areas I know that we're looking at, this is from our organisation, because we deal with just data, and data is actually machine learning, and how that's going to help actually understand numbers, and it's just unbelievable. So, yeah, but just using machine learning to predict and do all the stuff. I mean, go to Lot 14 and see what they're doing, and it's just amazing. And again, that's, you know, that's what they're gearing up. They're, you know, working at what organisation is going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years' time. So you either hang on the coattails or be a leader and start thinking about it. And again, but to me, see, that isn't just a Gawler issue. To me, that should be where the LGA should be looking at that, and, you know, looking for interested people from different councils who want to be part of this, you know, form a, you know, like a working group and think about how do we do it. I mean, you'll pay a lot of money to the LGA. I think they should be thinking futuristic as well. Oh, well, so where are they getting their money from? Because they run a pretty big organisation that I can see.
If you look at their balance sheet, it's not from membership fees. Membership fees is probably less than 10%.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's grants. It's state government, very much state government, give them lots of money. But you're absolutely right. That advocacy around the future of local government, where AI sits, cyber security, bringing councils into the 21st century, particularly some of those smaller councils. And the LGA is very much an essential component of regional councils compared to some metro councils who, frankly, don't need the LGA. They've got the great capacity, some of the bigger councils. But the smaller councils really do rely on the LGA, and they do some really good work with local small councils. So, but yeah, there is opportunity in thinking that in that visionary space. Yeah. Mm.
Good. Thanks, Karen. Peter, anything from you on these reports?
No, I think obviously the LG Performance Excellence Program has passed its use by date pretty much. I just hope that the South Australian Local Government Information Framework is is robust, but we'll just have to wait and see, I guess, as to what that's going to look like. But that's going to be an important piece of work in the future if it can be done. Otherwise, it's going to be a waste of time. Okay.
One that's going to be on a website that all count. So, yep, sorry, benchmarking and yep, Henry.
Further to the reference in the report by Lakesh, on Wednesday we received an email. I received an email from the Office of Local Government which relates to and provides some further clarification on the Local Government Information Framework, and they're seeking some feedback from councils by the 16th of July. So we're looking at presenting a report to the June council meeting, but I'll circulate the same information to the Audit Committee members.
Yeah, that'll be good.
And we're going to circulate it to the elected members as well, just so that we're all part of this journey. So it's very much happening. Yeah, the Office of Local Government is sort of seeking some early comments. So league tables and so forth, here we come.
Thank you for that. So we've got a 4-part recommendation again here. So someone to move, so Karen move it, sorry, second it. Thanks, Natalie. All in favour? Okay, Carrie, thank you. Draft Audit Committee work plan. Now, was this not completed or was it just half completed or the way I looked at it? Yeah, 22, yeah. But usually there's, well, I'm just looking at the right one, right in the, all the areas. Oh, okay, sorry. So it's just, you've actually expanded that policy review of putting the individual policies. That's good. Per meeting, that's good. Any comments on the week plan? Paul? Henrik, can you turn your...
Oh, sorry.
Yes, through the chair, just wanted to reference the fact that what they had proposed for inclusion in the work plan, and I'm just trying to find it now. On the final item under section 7, other audit committee self-assessment survey. Generally do that once every 2 years, and I just thought it was appropriate to include that in, such that we would then table the survey to the November meeting and then table the results to the February meeting. So just as a point of reference.
And that's, now did you all do it by survey monkey last time? No, that was still a hard copy, wasn't it? I think, yeah, look, from all the others that I'm on now, the other audit that is done through Survey Monkey, and it just makes it so much easier, and then you can do all your results through pie charts and all, but also it captured all, and it does leave that, you know, anonymous as well. You just got 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever members you've got on the committee. So yeah, that'll be good. That can be looked at for. Okay, no further comments on the plan. Recommendation that we adopt the proposed 21-22 work plan. Someone move that way. Thanks, Natalie. Seconded. Peter? Thank you. All in favour? Okay, Karen. Okay, no items listed for discussion. You know, we've got items for future meetings through our plan. No questions without notice, motions without notice, nil. And close the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your time and contribution tonight. Good meeting. You just have to make sure that the chair of previous meetings finishes on time. Oh. Only joking, Captain. 7 minutes late, that was okay. I tried, I'm going to blame it on Brian Cunningham because he can talk, that bloke.